Hello everybody and welcome back to Embroidery Tutorials. We are still stitching through my 90 variation chain stitch sampler. We are currently on circle 3 out of 7 and today we're going to be finishing up circle 3 by doing 3 sort of random but all really fun chain stitch variations around the outside loop. And then next time we will be bringing on circle 4. Lots of fun stuff in circle 4. So today we are covering alternating double chain stitch. If you were around for the double chain stitch that we did in a previous video, you may immediately notice that this one is nothing like that. So why are the names so related? I don't know, I didn't name them. We're also going to be looking at backstitched chain stitch, which is exactly what it sounds like, backstitch and chain stitch combined. And then we're going to be covering magic chain stitch, which has some other names. Some people just call it alternating chain stitch, but the term alternating is way overused, so I like calling it magic chain stitch. It magically uses 2 different colors, and the second color just disappears every time you need it to. So let's get started. The first thing you'll want to do is mark your circle into thirds. It can be anywhere you want it to be. Just put some dots wherever you're planning to start and end each of your stitches. And then let's start on that first third with our alternating double chain stitch. You're going to start out by coming up through the fabric and creating one simple, normal chain stitch loop. Then we're gonna get crazy. So after you've created that first loop, you're coming up, bringing your needle through that first loop, exactly like you're gonna do regular forward chain stitch. But now, instead of just creating another regular loop, you're gonna go back down at the very beginning, at the base of the loop before, and then come up on the main line 1 stitch length away and through the loop you've created. So you basically have like this little hook-shaped loop that comes out of the top of your previous stitch and goes down at the bottom of your previous stitch. And that's what you're going to continue doing all the way through. It'll alternate automatically. I don't think you could do this not alternating. It really wouldn't make sense. So now you're coming up at the base of your previous stitch, which is inside the loop of your very first stitch, and then coming up 1 stitch length away. So now you have a hook sort of in the opposite direction. This one hooking the top of your previous hook and going down in the top of your very first stitch. Continues this way all the way to the end. It sounds a little confusing when I describe it, but I think this one is pretty easy. It's really easy to get as soon as you start doing it, or even just from watching it done. And it's fun and interesting. I will note that you don't see a lot of the texture that it's creating with the thread type and color that I've used here, unfortunately. If you use a thicker thread with this, it'll really show off the design of the chain stitch and that it's something different and interesting a lot more. So feel free to play around or to use all 6 strands on this one or something thicker like a cotton pearl just to see how it looks when you use that larger thread that shows more texture. Next up, we're going to be doing backstitched chain stitch. And for this, super easy, but we are going to be using 2 different colors of thread. If you would like, it does make it show up more and it makes it look more dramatic. So thread your needle with the first color, and then you are just filling in another third of this circle with regular chain stitch. You can do it forward or reverse, whichever one you prefer, but just go ahead and fill it in and let me know when you're done. We'll move on from there. All right, now that you've got a line of chain stitch here, you're gonna thread your needle with your second color, and then you're coming up in the middle of your very first loop. Either side, doesn't matter, but just come up straight in the middle of that, and you're going to be backstitching down the center of your chain stitch. So each backstitch, that little short straight stitch, should be covering the connection between each of your chain stitch. You could do proper or thread saver backstitch. I will link a video that talks about backstitch up in the corner if you've never done that before, but it's super easy, goes all the way down, creates a fun little double colored texture here, so give it a try. last but not least, we're gonna be doing magic chain stitch. Now I would suggest using a larger needle to do this unless you're gonna be using very thin thread, like 1 or 2 strands. I used 3 strands of each color of thread. You need 2 colors that go through the needle at one time. You are sewing with both colors at the same time. And I did not change my needle size, which led to some difficulties when I was sewing this. So make your life easier, go up a couple needle sizes to something that can easily take 6 strands of thread, or use fewer strands of thread. I don't really like using anything less than 3 strands for this tutorial, just because it doesn't really show up well enough, but you could always do that. So first things first, take 2 colors of thread and thread your needle with both of them at the same time. You can knot them together at the end, that's perfectly okay. And then we are doing a regular forward chain stitch. The big difference here is that every time you bring your needle up through the fabric and go through the loop that you've created, you need to separate your 2 colors of threads and only go through 1 color. The other color, just let it float off there to the side, ignore it for this loop, you don't need it. So by separating your 2 colors and only bringing your needle through one of them, you're letting the other color just slide underneath the surface, but it's still carrying on with you, which means on your next stitch when you come up, separate the colors again, but this time put the opposite color over your needle and ignore the color you just used. Pull your needle through again, and when you pull all that thread through, the previous color is going to disappear under the surface. So you get this magic concept of every other chain being a different color, which makes it look like you were somehow simultaneously sewing with 2 different threads on 2 different needles and you got them to blend together, when instead you were somewhat easily using 2 thread colors on 1 needle. The big thing to note here is that by not using one of the colors of thread every time you create a chain loop, you create extra length with that color of thread, which is why you'll see as I'm pulling that thread through, I'm having to give a little extra yank on that color that wasn't used to get rid of that little lump of thread that wants to stay up there above the fabric. And then I'm having to sort of even out or just run my fingers down my lengths of thread to get them to not have any loops or lumps or knots that are going to cause problems. So just make sure you're doing that as you move forward, always sort of keeping those threads together, evening them back out as you go. Technically, by the end, if you've done an even number of stitches with each color, your thread should still have about the same amount left over. Somehow it never does, but logically, it seems like it should. If your 2 loops are kind of twisted around each other, which happens almost all of the time for me, don't worry about it. Separate them as much as you can. Try to get any twisting that's happening to be way down at the base, and it should still work. If it's really, really twisted around each other, you're gonna run into problems. So just make sure you're pulling those 2 loops around each other and through each other until they're as untwisted as possible, and then go through that 1 color. And you shouldn't have too many problems with that. If anything, you might get like a little lump of thread at the base of your loop, but it blends into the previous loop, and so it doesn't really show up. Now, someone had commented on one of my previous videos showing this stitch that you could potentially do it with a ton of different colors. They said up to 6 because you could use 1 strand of thread from 6 different colors, leaving you with 6 strands total. And that is very true, and I'd love to see somebody mess around with it. I'm totally planning to experiment, and maybe I'll make a short video about it soon. You could actually even use more than 6 colors, because depending on the size of your needle and the weave of your fabric, you can get a lot more than 6 strands through your fabric. So you could potentially use 3 strands of 5 different colors, as long as you were able to get that through your needle eye and through your fabric. And then you could have this chain of rainbow colors that just switch every 5 stitches, and that would look really cool. So I am planning to experiment with that pretty soon. Maybe I'll make a little video of it. Comment down below if that's something you would be interested in seeing. Alrighty guys, that is it for today. We have finished circle 3. For those of you guys following along on the pattern, congratulations. For those of you following along not on the pattern, Also, congratulations, and for those of you who just joined today and maybe didn't even try this, congrats for getting through this video. Thank you so much for joining me. Next time we're going to be coming back with Circle 4, and you know what? I can't even remember what's in it, but it's going to be more variations of chain. Big surprise. It's going to be some interesting ones too as we move towards these last 4 circles. They are definitely going to get crazier and more interesting and more challenging and more satisfying. So stick around, come back for the next video. I will see you then. Thanks very much for watching.